once you have set it up. And oh, thank you so much, Ernest. I do appreciate it. And let me share the presentation now. Can you all see my screen now?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we have, I'm going to share with you very briefly just a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today on this session. And just wanted to mention that we're going to be spending this first session on going in a very general way, looking at what is the approach on using outcome harvesting, and the process of using outcome harvesting, the different steps, the concepts, and the use. This is to help you be able to start familiarizing more with this qualitative approach. And in our next session, by the end of February, I will be spending more time looking at the different tools from systems harvesting. And the overall goal, again, is to provide you with some guidance on the use of outcome harvesting for integrating it to the Marsabit Child Protection and Resilience Project. And also, very briefly, if we have time today in this session, I would like to just mention the way that we are planning to use and adapt outcome harvesting for FH and integrating it with our systems practice. So it will help us assess the systems change to capture systems behaviors from our identified systems solutions. Well, last year, as part of our new vision and as part of our FH program model, we are looking at this new program model and looking at new different Merrill approaches, qualitative approaches that we can seek, that we can use to help us address the root causes of to make a shift in our relationships, mindsets, and behaviors. And we are looking at different, like I said, in support of this new FH program model and efforts, we are looking to amplify our impact and broaden our use of different approaches, different methods that we can use to rethink our monitoring and evaluation approaches. As we embark in this new journey of reimagination, we're looking again for different tools, evaluation tools, to help us strengthen our FH systems more effectively and to embrace that systems transformation approach at FH. Outcome harvesting is part of this evaluation and monitoring tools that we're going to be using as part of this new systems transformation. This new approach, it requires a shift in our mindsets, going from accountability to learning from outputs to a more deeper systemic change. We need to integrate systems thinking, other participatory evaluation methods as outcome harvesting, and looking at a more comprehensive measurement framework, so we can better navigate the complexities of our FH systems, our interventions, and help us to foster long-term or sustainable impact. Measuring systems transformation requires, as I mentioned before, new approaches that goes beyond the traditional metrics and embraces more the complexity of change. We are looking to apply both the systems practice that it's focusing on trying to capture the visible and the invisible value, so we can create a more accurate and meaningful picture of systems change. I just want to emphasize the importance of using and complementing our quantitative approaches with qualitative participatory approaches, and the importance of continuous learning, deepening the data, and again, using these participatory approaches, which are essential for driving the long-term sustainable impact that we are looking in our new FH program model. And again, systems harvesting is well suited for complex program contexts. It is especially useful to help us identify and understand changes in the systems, both changes that are expected and unexpected, positive and negative, and to help us collect evidence of how program interventions are contributing to those changes. In the next slide, I just want to very briefly just share with you some of the different ways in which we are going to be using or embracing systems transformation and using outcome harvesting. Harvesting, I'm sorry, is one of our of the 5 complexity-aware monitoring approaches. And complexity-aware approaches are appropriate for, especially for projects or interventions where the cause and effect relationships are poorly understood, and it is difficult to identify solutions for those problems. Especially outcome harvesting is a useful approach in dynamic contexts to help us, again, capture the emergent changes in our projects. For example, instead of looking at what worked, or we will be looking at what is unfolding, what is the process of change, how is this change happening in our systems and our projects. In the traditional model, we're using theories of change, and one limitation that I see on using the theory of change is that it focuses mostly on what has worked. And in our new looking in a new perspective, we need to look at what is the process, what is the change that it's unfolding, and how we can capture using different approaches, qualitative, participatory approaches, to help us capture that emergent change, which might sometimes this is not visible, but it will become apparent over time. In this way, systems thinking or systems practice will help us move beyond looking at the individual projects and help us to consider the overall system, the overall resilience of the system as a whole, recognizing that our project interventions need to be adaptive, and to help us, we will be using systems harvesting again to effectively measure systems transformation. So we will consider both the visible and the invisible value. And let me just briefly explain it. The visible value includes those measurable outcomes that can be very easily documented, such as the number of people reached by our interventions, or the specific behavioral changes. However, on the other side, for the invisible value or emerging changes, we need to use other more different approaches, or more qualitative participatory approaches, such as outcome harvesting, for help us to uncover the invisible value through through this process, allowing for a more comprehensive and in-depth understanding of how this change is happening and why certain actions are being or certain strategies are being more effective than others. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the, we're going to be looking at three different, as part of our objectives for this session, we're going to be looking at the why, the what, and the how of outcome harvesting. Looking at the rationale behind using outcome harvesting, and again, looking at more in detail about how we can use this approach to help us capture outcomes that are predicted and unpredicted. And one of the ways that I would like to well, we're going to be looking at this in more detail. We're going to also be taking a closer look at the what, defining what are the different elements of outcome harvesting, of this methodology to help us identify and capture change in systems behaviors. And in our next session, we're going to be going in more detail. Today, I'm going to be briefly explaining the 6 different steps of the harvesting methodology and how to identify, substantiate, and analyze changes. But these different 6 steps, we're going to be doing it in our next session in more detail, looking at the different tools that can be used under each of these different steps and showing you some examples from other outcome harvesting evaluations that have been done here at FH and in other organizations. Can you all hear me well? And can you still hear me well? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes, you are
Oh,
very clear. We
oh,
can hear
okay.
you.
Thank you
We're
so
just
much.
an
Just wanted
attentive audience.
to. Sorry, just want to make sure because yes. Well, as we're going to be looking now at what is outcome harvesting, and well, I want to tell you that outcome harvesting was originated by Ricardo Wilson Grow in 2003. And for the next 10 years or so, he worked with other collaborators to refine and expand on the approach. Outcome harvesting grew out of the outcome mapping community and is deeply connected to that. It is strongly influenced by the utilization focused evaluation approach. Outcome harvesting can be summarized as a participatory method to help us identify, formulate, verify, analyze, and interpret the different outcomes coming from our interventions, and to help us answer the harvesting questions about our project or initiatives. This method helps us not just to capture the outcomes that are predicted, but also the unpredicted ones. And again, the unpredictable ones are those outcomes that we cannot foresee. It helps us to collect evidence about the positive and the negative outcomes, and then it works backwards to describe and to verify what has been the contribution that the project or the initiative had to contribute to those outcomes. And another aspect is that outcome harvesting can be useful for both monitoring and evaluation purposes. And it's useful for different types of evaluation purposes, for developmental, formative, and summative evaluations. Developmental, it's being developed in the process, and you're using action to generate a new idea or approach. Formative, it's in the early stages, and you are providing information to help shape and improve the evaluation. And then in the summative, it's when you're looking back in a retrospective way on what has been the contributions to the project. It can be conducted by internal staff or external evaluators, or a combination of both, or it can be, I have seen other combinations, like it can be also done internally just with an outcome harvesting coach. So there are different ways you can conduct outcome harvesting. But again, the more important thing here to emphasize is that it is a monitoring and evaluation method that will help um, the MCPRP program team to help retrospectively determine changes that have been achieved by the project and what has been the contribution to this. Well, in the next slide, just very briefly, again, just to mention that we're going to be looking at when can we use outcome harvesting? Where are those situations? Well, this methodology is well suited to use in our projects. And outcome harvesting is particularly useful for capturing outcomes in complex situations. And when the specific outcomes in your projects, the significance of those outcomes may be unknown in advance, or where the relationship between the cause and effect is not very well understood, and where also many different actors are influencing the change. So outcome harvesting is very well suited to, again, social and change initiatives in complex context. And by complex, I mean a context in which every event has multiple causes, and these causes are interacting with each other in dynamic and unexpected ways. So it is extremely difficult to predict what will happen next, and how will we how are we going to be those specific results, what are those specific outcomes and results of your project interventions. So again, just to mention that in the traditional um, in the traditional project planning framework, with the logical framework, uh, we are having, or it depends always on using, the logic and predictable results. However, when we are looking at complex situations or programs that are developing in complex and dynamic contexts, then it is not usually possible to predict what would be those results in advance. This is when systems harvesting is very good at looking at the complex projects. So if you don't know what will be those results are going to be, it is hard to understand the causal link between your work and the result. Then this is a good time when outcome harvesting would be very useful to integrate and to use. Well, in the outcome harvesting world, an outcome is defined as an observable change in the behavior of individuals, groups, communities, and organizations or institutions. These are different actions or activities, relationships, policies, and practices that are influenced by our interventions in one or more social actors. So some of the uh, the questions that we will be looking when using outcome harvesting is what has been happened in our interventions, when, where, and how. We're going to be collecting data also on what has been the contribution, the role of FH and our contributions to those changes, who else contributed, and what is the evidence for this change, why it was important, and what need it is addressing. So we're looking at documenting through these different questions the change process. So outcome harvesting, again, when I'm talking about, sorry, I need to make emphasize that social actors in outcome harvesting may include individuals, groups, communities, again, or institutions that are influenced by our interventions. And outcome harvesting is used to help us identify, monitor, and to learn from those changes in social actors. And through harvesting those outcome information coming from these questions, we can start harvesting this information from colleagues, the outcome information from colleagues, from partners, and from other stakeholders. This information needs to describe, again, the different questions that we have in the slide, what has changed, for whom, when, where, and why. And just to help us, help you all familiarize with the different terminology that is used in outcome harvesting, a change agent, sorry, in outcome harvesting is either an individual or an organization that it's influencing an outcome. For example, this could be our FH program teams, the civil society organizations, the community members. In outcome harvesting, the change agent is often an organization that it's running or implementing the project. Then the next one, the social actors, are those individuals, groups, or institutions, again, that are that changes because of our interventions. We have the harvest users. These are the stakeholders that need the findings of an outcome harvest to make decisions or to take actions. These may include one or more people within the change within the organization, or third parties such as our donors, our FH investors. And then the harvester is the person who is responsible for managing the outcome harvest. Again, this could be internal or external consultants or project staff, or including, for example, at FH, our country offices, the mayoral specialists, and the, working with the consultants. So the the harvester is the one who leads the outcome harvesting process and who facilitates and supports the participation. Well, I'm not sure if you are familiarized with this diagram, but or this figure, this map, but um, this is showing the sphere of control, the sphere of influence, and the sphere of interest. Um, I will go very briefly over it with you. So just to explain you that within the sphere of control, for example, our project staff are implementing or carrying out activities that are leading to different outputs. And this is within our sphere of control. Those are the outputs that are used by the different change agents to influence other actors, other social actors, to contribute to outcomes. Really, the project staff is engaging directly with the change agents, but usually they do not engage directly with the social actors. This is the typical situation. We are collecting data about outcomes from change agents, and that is when outcome harvesting is particularly helpful, is when we don't have a direct access to those social actors. We cannot reach them. So here it's important to make a difference between um, outputs and outcomes. What is exactly that difference? Well, output is the immediate product of our interventions. It is the result of our project activities that are implemented within our sphere of control. These are usually tangible, are easy to measure, and these become the means to achieve our project outcomes. But outputs are the preconditions for to achieve the lower level outcomes. And then the outcomes are those that we want to achieve. It is not an action, but rather a state of being. It is a long-term change. And these usually are not within our sphere of control. They are within our sphere of influence. We can influence those outcomes, but we cannot control them. So um, just wanted to explain you this, that usually when we are implementing different project with different interventions, we are able to influence those outcomes. But there are other actors within our project that are contributing to these outcomes as well. So outcome harvesting is again, is used mainly to help us identify, monitor, and learn from changes in the social actors. And through collecting different harvesting and collecting detailed outcome information from our colleagues, our partners, and from our FH shareholders. And this information needs to describe again those different outcome questions that I showed you in the previous slide. And this will help us. The systems harvesting methodology will be able to help us generate more credible evidence of the contribution of our interventions to achieve positive change within a system and our interventions. And again, achieving and sustaining any outcomes depends on the contributions of different multiple and different interconnected actors. So here, I just want very briefly to go. I don't want to spend much time on this since we're um, uh, uh, running a little bit out of time, but just a summary of the primary stakeholders who are usually involved and participate in an outcome harvest. There are 4 different stakeholders that are really involved in outcome harvesting. And again, this is outcome harvesting is mostly a participatory approach. We have 4 different key groups that are involved. The first one is the project staff. These are our FH program team staff from the country offices that are involved in the implementation of the project. And you are very important as you are the knowledgeable source about the outcomes. Usually project staff, project teams may play an important role, not only as informants, but also sometimes as I mentioned before, you can be the internal outcome harvesting staff who are going to be helping to collect that data as well. And then the second group is the primary intended users. And these are also very important groups. It's a very important group. These are the people that need the information from the outcome harvesting. And they're going to be using the findings to make decisions or to take actions. And in the next group, again, we're going to be talking about the change agents. And they are also important. These are the people who are going to be the respondents. Again, we don't generally have access to those social actors. So you need to identify those individuals and organizations that influence those outcomes. They become our key informants. And finally, we have the outcome verifiers or the substantiators. And the these are knowledgeable people, individuals who knows about the outcomes, and but they are not directly involved in the implementation of the project. So they become our outcome verifiers or third parties who are knowledgeable of these outcomes, but they are responsible for reviewing the outcome descriptions that have been compiled, and then they comment on whether or not those descriptions reflect or whether they agree with them or not. So again, we have different groups that are involved in in the outcome harvesting process. So now we're going to be moving on the why of outcome harvesting. And I'm going to be going very fast on this, as I already mentioned you part of the why aspects. But outcome harvesting is very well suited, again, to using social change initiatives in complex contexts. And again, as we embark on our transformation journey at FH, we are looking for reconciled and holistic relationships for those that are challenged by poverty, by injustice, and by marginalization. We are looking for opportunities to reimagine. So, in terms of looking at the design of our programs, rather than focusing on conventional project design, we are looking to do solution design. Um, we are also moving from a linear thinking to a more systemic thinking. We're starting to look at putting a systemic lens on our projects and interventions, and we're starting to we're starting to look for the visible and the invisible value of our identified solutions and how we can capture those changes. So again, systems harvesting is an evaluation tool that will help us to capture that change and the things that have changed in our communities that we serve or in the life experiences of our shareholders. And it will help us to look at those changes by going backwards to help us understand what the system or project has done to contribute to those changes, and what is the insights that are coming from our systems, and how we can better understand what has changed in the community, and how our system or project relates to those observed changes. And this is part of how we're planning to use again or to adapt outcome harvesting in our new systems transformation. And as you know, systems practice essentially is a method for understanding complex environments and identifying the dynamics that have the greatest potential for impact. So the goal here is to identify leverage points, areas where small shifts can lead to significant improvements or enabling more effective interventions and strategies, or these become our identified solutions to help us address those complex challenges. Um, Systems harvesting is well suited again to help us reveal the unexpected, more nuanced outcomes, particularly in those dynamic and complex environments that we have here in FH. And again, outcome harvesting, um, it's a participatory monitoring and evaluation learning approach, which help us to determine again how our interventions have contributed to those changes, and to help us capture and document more those outcomes coming from our systems. Our specific definition of outcomes at FH is outcomes can be both intended and unintended, and they may occur at very different levels of the systems, at the individual, the organizational, the societal level, and they are often interconnected and influenced by multiple factors, multiple actors, and including different feedback loops, relationships between systems, elements, and external influences. So systems harvesting, systems practice, they become very well suited for our system transformation. For systems harvesting is would be an effective way to seek to value and to include different inputs, different perspectives from our different FA shareholders, and to help us make decisions that are more data-driven and evidence-based. Also, this approach will help us to reveal, again, those outcomes that are usually unintended, or and that we encountered in dynamic and complex environments. Our aim is to understand the process of change and how each outcome is contributing to this change. So, well, very briefly, it's outcome harvesting will be used again. Can help FH program teams and partners to identify early signs of change in our systems, and to also help us identify a broad range of outcomes at the different levels, as I mentioned before, that were produced by our interventions. So not just looking at one level, but at different levels, so we can amplify our impact. And through this approach, we will be collecting evidence on those changes in a given system, and then we're going to be working backwards to determine how these our interventions are contributing to those observed changes. Um, Through this approach, you can get a better understanding of the significance of those changes, and whether those stakeholders that were affected by these interventions and are involved in these changes, they can validate that those changes have occurred or have happened. So by using the outcome harvesting, we'll be collecting this evidence on positive and negative outcomes, and then that are occurring in our strategies, in our interventions, and those outcomes that are more significant. We're going to be able to capture and document those significant outcomes, and that are more relevant to achieving our desired system changes. So we're looking again to help us using this approach to help us capture those changes in systems behavior and to document that evidence that it's occurring in our FH systems. I just want to emphasize that. And again, we're looking at combination of different approaches and what changes are how we can use those approaches to help us capture those changes of systems behaviors and looking at what changes have occurred for whom, for where, and for when. How these changes occur, and then document that. We will be using different tools to document that. We'll be using other tools to help us map those outcomes and to look at the different patterns, the different trends, and then learn from those patterns and trends. These will be the different tools that I will be going more in detail in our next session. And well, in our next slide, I would like to just move on the different on the how of the outcome harvesting. And again, in this session, we're going to be doing it in a very general way, at a very high level. I'm going to be going in more detail in the second session on how we do each of these steps, on the process of doing systems harvesting, and looking at the different tools that are used and templates that are will be useful to use on under each of these different steps. So outcome harvesting has different 6 different steps that includes the planning, the data collection, the verification, the analysis, the documentation, and the reporting. The first is the design of the outcome harvest, where in this step we are working directly with our primary intended users of the harvest. We are focusing on actionable information for our primary users. And then I'm going to be just going in more detail in the next slide so you can take a closer look. And again, this step, it's identifying the information, the most important information for the primary users of the harvest. We're going to be using this step to get an agreement between those who will be using those findings and those that will be conducting the harvest. We're going to be identifying the harvesting questions, and then the scope and the harvesting questions to be included. And then the answers to those questions will provide relevant information about how our systems and interventions are behaving, which is going to be useful for assessing the influence of our interventions or our solutions in the system. And then this information will help us to make timely adjustments in the solutions. So once the harvest questions have been identified, then we will have to develop a plan which identifies what information is needed to answer each of these questions. What sources are most likely to produce that evidence or that credible information, and what is the level of detail that is required, and how we're going to be doing the analysis to classify the findings. Some of the when you are there, some of the things that you need to look out in this step is to determining the scope of the outcome description, the harvesters, the intended audiences, how they are planning to use these findings, again, and the frequency of the data collection. You will have, in this step, you will have to come with the harvest questions and the outcome description scope. I'm sorry. On the next step, the second step is the harvest of the initial outcomes. And in this step, we're going to be looking at the system harvesting process that involves the collection of relevant and verifiable data coming from secondary sources. And this data is supplemented with primary sources. This will help us to draft the outcome descriptions or explanations of the changes that are occurring within our systems. And these descriptions document, we will need to document what has changed, when, why, and under what conditions the change has occurred. And again, more importantly, the descriptions also will need to explain what are the factors that are contributing to those changes, and what are the specific contributions that are being made by FH and our partners, the intervention. So again, an important thing here is that unlike we are used to do that traditional approach to M&E, identifying the intended outcomes of interventions prior to the implementation. In systems harvesting, we are looking to work retrospectively, after the implementation. We're going to be gathering that evidence of changes to the system and our interventions that have been brought about by our identified solutions. And this evidence is going to be used to, again, identify and describe the outcomes of those solution interventions, and to help us also discover evidence of positive outcomes intended by the interventions, and also to help us identify unexpected outcomes that can be either positive or negative. So in this step, what it is important is to gather the data, to draft the outcome harvesting descriptions, which is the results from this step. And how are we going to be gathering that data? We're going to be doing identifying the outcomes at different levels, from different sources, from documents, outcome journals, and then the data collection methods that we are going to be using to collect the data. It can be different ways. We can use interviews, surveys, and other possible sources. Then we can start writing our preliminary list of outcome descriptions, with some questions for review and for clarification. Again, well, how are we going to be capturing this information? As I mentioned, we can use different methods to collect this information, and you can use again the interviews, the focus groups, the surveys, and the desk review. You need to start reviewing first all of the documents, with looking at the different outcomes coming from those documents. And again, triangulating the different sources, the secondary and the primary sources. So when I'm sorry, I think in this step, sorry, I forgot to show you this, but in the step 3, we're going to be, this is a very important step. We're going to be engaging with, this is when we're going to be engaging with our informants, our social actors, our change agents, in formulating those outcome descriptions. So we're going to be collecting that information directly with those change agents to help us review those outcome descriptions and to identify and formulate additional ones. Once we have this list of preliminary outcome descriptions, We will be supplementing this with our primary sources, the different documents from the project. And the next step is to engage our primary actors, including the program staff, the implementing partners. This becomes an iterative and participatory process to review those outcome descriptions. You can have different workshops to organize different workshops to help us review. You will have to train those program staff who will be um, conducting those workshops to review those outcome descriptions, and then these steps again. This is an important step in which we will have. To build on the capacity of the change agents to collect, to draft those outcome descriptions, to analyze and to use that data that usually tell us the story of how uh, the change has unfold, and this is when project staff will engage directly with change agents to review the data, or the external consultant to review the data and to inform the evolution of the project. So this will help us really in this step. This is the way where we will help us to understand what has been our contributions to those outcomes and to the system's change behaviors. And as we look at the next step, step 4, um, we can, in this step, we're going to be substantiating the outcomes. This is specific terminology using outcome harvesting, but what it's all about is in this step, we're going to be reviewing the outcomes. Those outcomes, this is a process where the outcome statements that we have are verified and validated again by our substantiators. These are, again, independent third-party informants who are knowledgeable about the project and about the changes in the system and the factors that are contributing to them, but they are not involved in the implementation. And this will give more credibility to the findings. In this step, the harvester, meaning the internal or external consultants, will continue to triangulate those different sources for information about how the system has changed, how FH and its partners have contributed to those changes, and more importantly, what is the significance of those changes that have been related to the resilience, to the flourishing of our FH shareholders. So in this step, we're going to be obtaining also written testimonies and feedback from a sample of informants, and also developing the details for the outcome statements. And it's important that just to mention that in here, for example, the M&E specialists and other members will obtain the view of independent, again, individuals who are knowledgeable about those changes. And then the different substantiators, the independent stakeholders, may include, for example, government counterparts, the civil society organizations, representatives from professional associations. Those will become our independent on our substantiators, our third parties. Well, once we have gone through the process of gathering and collecting and drafting the preliminary list of outcome descriptions. Then once those have been substantiated by our third parties, we will have to go to analyze and interpret and classify those different outcomes that are answering our different harvesting questions. So for the categories or the classification, the classification of these different types of outcomes and types of changes will help us to interpret that classification on whether on what the users, the harvesting users, will find most useful. So in this step, it's important to emphasize that we're going to be looking at mapping those outcomes and help us to identify again what are the patterns, the trends, and the processes of system changes, and grouping them into different categories that are reflecting how the changes are closer. So this can again, this is part of where we're going to be. I'm going to be looking in more detail in our next session on how to do this. And then what are the different tools that we can use for the analysis and the interpretation. Some of the results coming from this step are, again, the verified, the substantiated outcome descriptions, including the contribution and the significance. These are elements that need to be included in the outcome descriptions. And then we're going to be using also an outcome database. We're going to be collecting all of those different pieces of information from the outcome descriptions. Again, we will have an outcome reporting template for the process to guide the outcome reporting, and including those elements: the outcome statement, the significance, the contribution, the sources. And again, we'll be taking a closer look at these tools and templates that will help us to capture the outcomes, the changes, and assess if those behavior changes have occurred. We'll be looking at those in more detail. And finally, our last step in the systems harvesting process is supporting the use of findings. And in this step, the harvesters, are proposing different issues for discussion to the harvest users and to help facilitate learning, dialogue and learning. It's like reflection and learning. And one important thing to mention is that um, the system harvesting process is stakeholder centered. And these different steps that we have gone through are helping us, or helping the program team to collect the evidence of what has changed for the project stakeholders or our FH shareholders. And then we are going backwards to evaluate whether and how our project has contributed to those different changes. So again, beyond just tracking the most important, the system harvesting would be used for this purpose, but more importantly, also it's about helping us to support learning, about learning from those changes, learning from our identified solutions, and gaining more in-depth insights on the effectiveness of our identified solutions, as well as to help us to understand the unfolding, the process of change, and how each outcome is contributing to the system. So I just want to emphasize that, and to mention that these different steps may overlap and can be iterative, and we can redesign one step or return or modify an earlier one. It's an iterative and participatory process. Well, a critical part, and perhaps the hardest, I will say, part of doing or implementing this the systems harvesting methodology is forming good outcome statements. Also, the from outcome harvesting. So I just want to very briefly discuss the different elements that need to be included and to be to the so those outcomes are considered credible to be used in a harvesting evaluation. And these elements, usually an outcome statement, it needs to include three different elements. The first one is the description of the outcome. This is an observable and verifiable change in behavior of an actor that is influenced by our system, by our interventions. And those could be relationship changes in relationships, in actions, policies, or practices. And then the second element is the significance of the outcome. This will include an explanation of why the outcome is important towards achieving our desired identify solutions of our FH system. And then the contribution of those uh, of uh, of our systems to those outcomes. So that would be the also need to be documented. This contribution may be direct or indirect, intended or not intended. Um, and also, very importantly, when we document these outcomes, those outcomes need to be smart outcomes. Again, outcomes that are being specific and formulated with details. So they're measurable. They will contain both quantitative, qualitative information. They can be achieved. They're relevant and they're timely. So this is just want to emphasize that this is important when we start capturing or looking for collecting, reviewing, or identifying those outcomes. The way that we're going to be documenting those in our outcome database. And well, just very briefly, again, different pieces of information needs to come again in, as I was explaining when documenting these outcomes. And these other pieces of information, it's about the timing and location, when and where, what's the change, when did the change happen, where, in terms of the milestone, what happened and who has been involved, who were the different actors involved, what has changed in their behaviors, their relationships, the practices. Um, why is this outcome or change relevant? What is the relevance to our identified solutions? What is the relevance to address the FH, the problem or the need in our communities, and what is how is the our identified solutions contributing. What are the different partners who are helping us to support this change. So we're trying to look at documenting these different aspects or these different pieces of information. I'm going to skip on this because this is, I was going to present this, but because we only have 10 more minutes, or I'm not sure if you are able to stay for a little bit longer in the session since I had these technical issues at the beginning and we lost like 15 minutes. So I'm not sure if it's fine for you all to stay um, after like 15 more minutes for to complete this session. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
You can hear
Ye-
you.
Hello?
Hi.
yes, we hear
Yes.
you. We hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Just wanted to
Okay.
make sure
No
that
problem.
if it's fine with you to stay for a little bit longer, like
Yeah.
10 more minutes after 11, so I can come.
Okay. No problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, oh, okay. Thank you so much. Well, just very briefly, for example, in the readings that I sent you, the pre-readings, for the FH, the outcome harvesting evaluation that was conducted in FH Uganda for the agroecology program, they used the USAID, the 5R framework was used for this evaluation. They used it to identify the different types or to classify the different types of change. So this is just a framework that was used particularly for that evaluation in Uganda, and that I've seen other outcome harvesting evaluations that have used this framework to help classify the different types of outcomes and changes, uh, and to identify those. So just wanted to mention that mainly this has to be agreed with the primary users. They will agree on what is the most useful, depending on the harvesting, the guiding questions, what is the most useful and more appropriate way um, to classify those types of outcomes or changes. Again, the way that they use it at FH Uganda for the agroecology program, they were looking at this framework and then looking at what was the local system producing, the roles, the functions that the actors were taking on, the different relationships or interconnections between the actors, and then looking at the rules, the regulations, the norms that structure the system, and the resources, the inputs into the system. Um, just to emphasize that it is important to define this or get an agreement in the step one on what are the types of changes of interest in when we are having these initial conversations with our primary users of the harvest. So we need to either use a framework to identify those changes for coming from our FH systems or interventions, or based on those guiding questions, uh, come for the most appropriate or the most useful types of changes. Then we have to identify the relevant actors who have contributed to those changes. And through the process, we need to involve different perspectives. Well, what are some of uh, the different strengths and the limitations of using outcome harvesting? Well, just to very briefly summarize on this is some of the strengths. It's that outcome harvesting really does a very good job on working with complex projects, complex and dynamics contexts where it offers an opportunity to capture changes in our systems and results, whether these were planned or unplanned, intended, positive or negative. Um, it uses employs very different sources, as I have mentioned, to collect this data from our outcome for our outcome descriptions. We use different methods, surveys, interviews, workshops, emails, written documentation, and we need to verify those harvested outcomes for to increase the credibility of the findings. So that's where we are going to be looking at the substantiators to help us verify those outcome descriptions. And then On the other side, some of the limitations, it's the skill, the time that is required, because it's mostly a qualitative, but it's also quantitative. So we have to use both to complement, use the qualitative methods to help us complement the quantitative data. So, and this is the way that we have been using it also for the two different outcome harvesting evaluations in Hefesh, Uganda, and the Republic of Congo in DRC. Those we complemented the quantitative data with the outcome harvesting data. So but sometimes this process may take, you need to build the capacity, and you need to have the time, the necessary time to identify and to formulate, to review those outcome descriptions and have different instances of reviewing those outcomes. So this may take some additional time, and you need to be aware of that. And then also, again, this is a different way of looking at the outcomes and working backwards, representing a new way of thinking about change for some of us. And again, this is a shift in how we're going to be using, not using that traditional approach, but just looking backwards in a retrospective way and looking to identify those changes in systems behaviors that we can capture and we can document. And again, when we are looking at systems changes, systems behavior changes, this may be articulated at different levels. Again, this can be changes in policies, in practices, in resources. This can be changes in relationships, in connections, in power dynamics, and also more in-depth changes that are more held, like beliefs and assumptions that are preventing those systems changes to happen. So we are, again, we're looking at collecting or documented changes at different levels whenever possible, and just keeping in mind that. And then by utilizing the systems harvesting approach, again, this will help us to capture those system behavior changes, to help us better understand if these changes are occurring, at what level. And we're going to be collecting a specific evidence on how these changes are either helping us to get to the desired outcomes on our FH systems, or what needs to be adjusted or change in our identified solutions. Again, very quickly, just this the system harvesting includes a more holistic perspective. It helps us to capture those complex interactions within our FH system. And it's going beyond just measuring direct outputs from our activities that have been implemented, but helping us to understand the wider impacts. And then we're using systems harvesting also because it will allow us for flexibility in our interventions, in our identified solutions design, helping us to adapt those solutions, and it will help us to provide us with a deeper understanding and more meaningful insights from our interventions that are contributing to the systems, to our FH systems. And well, just to mention that systems harvesting, it's a learning journey. It's help us to empower our FH program teams to uncover the impacts of our work by focusing on actual outcomes and involving the FH, our FH shareholders' perspectives, hearing their voices in the process, and this will help us to get more in-depth, meaningful insights, and to help us make informed decisions for continuous improvement. Um, the system harvesting approach is very well suited, as I mentioned you in the session, for understanding um, uh, complex. It's very helpful to gain a more deeper, nuanced understanding of how these different efforts are making a difference and enhancing the lives of those that we serve, our communities. So creating more of a lasting change and sustainable impact for our communities. And I just want to finish with that and to open the session. I know we are late, but just wanted to open the session for any comments, any questions that you may have. And I'm also would be available by email in case you you cannot stay in the session for longer. But just want to thank you again for participating in this session. And we're going to be putting together different resources on systems harvesting, the toolkit, and also you can take a closer look to the different outcome harvesting evaluation reports, or I can send you the link so you can get the full evaluation report. The one that I sent to you in the meeting invite was just a learning brief. So if you want to take a look at the full evaluation report and how the process was conducted, that would be, I can share that with you, and it is also available in our SharePoint, the Mission Impact SharePoint. So thank you so much. And I'm not sure if you have any comments or questions.
Uh, Thank you very much, Geraldina. This is Samson, and thank you for the very useful highlights and insights that you have given us. I think the methodology is just coming at the right time, and I think one of the things that we've been doing, we've looked most of the evaluations that we do, we've mainly been looking at how we have attributed, and it will be very interesting just to come up with outcomes and how possibly we have contributed directly to those outcomes, which I think is very interesting. And so thank you very much for the good facilitation. One of the questions that I would want to ask is, most of this discussion mainly looking at this tool being an evaluation and learning kind of an approach. Maybe you tell us possibly how, because at one point you also mentioned it's a monitoring, evaluation, and learning tool. And also you mentioned that it is used retrogressively. That's a difficult word for me. So maybe you could highlight how then this applies in the time of monitoring of a particular project. Thank you.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Sansom. That's a great question, and thank you for that. Yes, this is, yes, you can be using outcome harvesting for monitoring and for evaluation in both instances. And the way that we are foreseen to use the system harvesting here is to use it systematically to collect, to continually being collecting data from the different outcomes, intended and unintended, specifically unintended outcomes coming from our uh, um, from our systems and our identified solutions. So for monitoring purposes, then you will have you will use specific tools like outcome journals, documenting those outcomes, and being able to continually collecting and verifying these outcomes um, at different points in the implementation. That's a way that that you can use this approach. And again, I can explain you this. We will be seeing more of this in the next session on the different tools, and I will make sure to go in more detail about if you are using it for monitoring different points in the implementation of your project. What are the tools that you can use for to collect that or document those outcomes? I hope that answers your questions.
It answers. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome, Samson.
Trey's hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let me just generally start with echoing what Samson said. This is really good. Thank you for the presentation. It's very clear, coherent, and thank you, Geraldina, for that. It is really very helpful. Yeah, I think at least outcome harvesting is really relatively new, particularly in FH. And yeah, it's as you said, it can be used for different purposes. But just what I wanted to know is, you mentioned that it is retrospective, means you start from the id. I mean, what was from the outcome and go back and see. So is there a frequency of doing outcome harvesting on a project, or we should wait until, I don't know how frequent is that, yearly, or every 3 years, or the project life by the end? Or is that just, is there a best practice on that, or just the project leadership just decide when to utilize? I don't know if that's clear. Sorry.
No, yes, thank you, thank you. That's a very good question as well. And yes, the way that you need to get an agreement in the first step when you are designing the harvesting, depending on how you want to how often you would like to collect at certain points of the implementation of the FH system, what would be uh, usually it's when you have completed the implementation of those interventions, when it's most useful, so you can retrospectively use the system harvesting once you have implemented those interventions, to look at what has been the outcomes that are coming from the system. And then but if you make this agreement at what certain important points in the system where you want to measure what are those outcomes, positive, negative outcomes that are coming, that's when it becomes very useful as well, because then you can learn from those results, and then you can make changes accordingly. You can adapt, make adaptations, or adjust your solutions based on that evidence that you are getting. So but usually you have to determine this in agreement with the primary user. So this will be with the leadership, with with the project, the country office, the project staff who will be involved in implementing, the implementing partners who are going to be implementing those different interventions. And the way we plan to use it for systems, for FH systems, is yes, to continually, so it's going to be systematic, like continually trying to measure that and triangulate that, with the mission impact report, with that data, and then using that evidence to inform what adjustments are needed to be done in our systems to improve or to help us achieve those desired outcomes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
I'm just witnessing the importance. The lesson in Uganda. It was conducted in the mid term of uh, the project, and the findings helped the project to really reshape, even to look for reshape and consider, adapt the project and to achieve the objective. So that's really a good tool. Except it's heavy and time consuming and requires expertise to do this. That's the only drawback or limitation to use it quickly, particularly for the learning purposes. Otherwise, yes, I totally agree with you. Thank you very much.
oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Yes, and yes, this is part of again, it's helping. It requires to build some capacity in project staff on how to conduct these workshops, to review the outcome statements, the outcome descriptions, and when you're looking or reviewing those different documents. On how to start compiling or looking at identifying those outcomes. And but again, this is something that it takes some time, but the most important thing is, again, using this as the process of learning. I think that's the most important from this approach, that it will help, in the process of doing and conducting the harvesting, the process of learning, from and documenting those changes in behavior or those outcomes, and learning, looking at what are those positive and negative outcomes, and what are using that evidence to make shifts in the system. I think that's what we are going to be doing, integrating that evidence to make the necessary adjustments or shifts in the system. So yes, for how to use it, well, again, you have to make an agreement on during the first step, on when you are designing the harvest with the harvest users, on depending on the needs of the harvest users for this information, and what would be the time frame where you're going to be conducting or collecting this evidence, from which actors we're going.
Yeah, thank you. There is a hand up, Emmanuel, and there's also a question on the chat. Maybe I would go with the first question on the chat, and then Emmanuel comes. The question on the chat is, what criteria can we use to determine whether an outcome is significant enough to document? That is by Ernest. And then after that, Emmanuel will go ahead and ask his question.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'm sorry, couldn't hear the last part of the question. I'm so sorry, Ernest. What is the criteria or
Yeah, let me go again. So what criteria can we use to determine whether an outcome is significant enough to document?
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
from Honest, yeah.
And yes, that's very important in outcome harvesting because yes, you again you need to agree on when to substantiate which outcomes, which data in terms of the outcome significance, the contribution, who you're going to be your sources of information that will the substantiators and usually the credibility in the outcome statements are judged by the internal or external evaluator and project staff. It's this is this is when you need the substantiator. Why this is why substantiating those list of outcomes is very important because those outcomes need to be confirmed by those one or more substantiators. They're going to be reviewing those outcomes and then they're going to be confirming if those outcomes are accurate or not accurate, and if we can keep those outcomes on the final list of outcomes. But that's where you are triangulating. You your outcomes becomes more credible because you are triangulating different data sources. You are looking for increasing the credibility of those outcomes by involving these different substantiators who are confirming that those outcomes occur or didn't occur. And this is a process often on how you yeah, you increase the credibility of those outcomes. And then again, as I was saying, the most important thing that you need to identify in the outcomes, again, once you start reviewing those outcomes, um, you have to look at those who are knowledgeable about the outcomes, those that are motivated to share information, and then looking that, when you are documenting those outcomes, to make it credible, you have to include the three elements that I mentioned you in the slides, the outcome description. Let me just go back to that. The outcome description, the quality, I mean, the way that you have to document that is using smart outcomes. Again, more very detailed documented outcome descriptions, and then adding the second element, the significance, the relevance of those outcomes, and the contributions. So you have to, the criteria becomes like you need to describe those three elements for each outcome, and then for the final list of outcomes. And then also to increase the credibility, you have to verify or substantiate those outcomes.
Thank you. I think, Ernest, your question is answered. So you can move on to Emmanuel.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Geraldina. My question is, so from the presentation that outcome harvesting can be used both as formative and summative. So my question is, how is it used as formative? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, in terms of using it for formative, as a formative, you will be looking at how you can, what are the different outcomes that, the types of outcomes, the types of changes that you are looking in, depending on the different identified solutions. So, well, what would be depending on the harvesting questions, what would be uh, the the way that you have the different outcomes that you foresee under the different harvesting questions. So you have to be looking at um, the results, the desired outcome, the desired results from your interventions or identified solutions, possible changes or outcomes that may be expected that will be described in the identified solution, and then again, just looking at how you will be using the system harvesting, the methodology to be able to capture those changes at different instances in your program. Um, uh, Sometimes you have to just use um, different ways in which you can devise or foresee how you're going to be monitoring the change, and how change you have to get an agreement on that, on how you're going to be collecting the data, from whom, again, who's going to be the sources. So you do it that in the formative aspect of the evaluation. How is the outcome harvesting methodology going to be help you to capture those predicted and unpredicted changes coming from your interventions. And in the summative, I'm sorry, in the summative, well, it's just a retrospective. Just after the implementation of your interventions have concluded, then you start looking at the process of going backwards, and then just looking at capturing those system behavior changes, intended and unintended outcomes from your harvest, and looking at possible sources for documenting those, identifying and documenting those outcomes. And again, just looking at this, identifying the most useful harvesting questions that would be included for framing, or looking at the framing the types of changes that you will be looking for, classifying those changes. And it's the way I look, they have used it. Usually, is more in the retrospective way, like for summative evaluations, mostly.
Thank you, Gerardina. Emmanuel, trust your question has been answered. And all right, thank you. It says it's okay. So thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other hand up. So I'll hand over the meeting to you, Gerardina, to end the meeting and give us the way forward. But I want to appreciate everybody who participated today. Thank you, Faye, for joining us, and the rest of the team who have stayed on to participate in this meeting. Looking forward to the next session. So over to you, Geraldine.
Oh, thank you. Thank you again so much. Thank you everyone for joining today. And again, I will be sharing with you the two reports from the outcome harvesting evaluations that have been done in Uganda and DRC. And Also, well, in our next session, we'll be going in more detail. I think it will be more clear for you all on how, I will put some examples on how organizations are using outcome harvesting, or have used this methodology in a retrospective or summative evaluation, and some other organizations that have used it for monitoring purposes. But again, the most important thing is that when you're using outcome harvesting is we are looking at what is the vision of our FH system and how our interventions going to be contributing, if you're going to be using it in the formative aspect, in the formative evaluation, who are the partners who are going to be involved in or the actors of our interventions, and that are aiming to influence those our FH interventions and systems. What are the desired outcomes to be sought by the system, and how will the system or our program will contribute to those change processes. And so those are things that you need to be aware of. You're going to be using these also for a formative purpose or a formative evaluation. But I'll make sure to provide some examples in our next session, so this will be more clear. I know this is a lot of information in our first session, but in the next one it will be more clear for you how we apply the different steps and what are the different tools or templates that can be used. And when do we need to use each of those? Thank you again so much. I hope you have a great rest of your evening in Kenya.
Thank you so much,
you.
Radina. Give Freya an opportunity to say hello to us.
Yeah, thank you, Geraldina. I really appreciate again. This is very, very helpful as we are learning. And I think as a pilot country, Kenya needs to also learn how to use this in outcome harvesting, particularly with the systems, as we are piloting this new model, using also this tool would help. So I think it is very timely, very relevant, and thank you for your contribution towards that. And we ask, look into how you can support as a team is learning towards using this tool. So just wanted to say thank you again. We keep in touch, and we are also expecting next training that continues from here. Thank
Oh,
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye now.
Bye.